Afternoon, everybody. Thank you so much for coming. My name is Karen Schmink. I'm the planning director here with the city of Woodland Park. And I'm assuming everyone is here today for a workshop related to historic preservation of potentially historic properties, some designated, some not. And we have members of our historic preservation committee here in attendance. So if you guys could raise your hands, Larry Black, Lori Glass, Frank Connors is our city council person assigned to that committee. And I'm not sure, I don't see anybody else from that committee. But we have a couple other members, and that would be Eric Simonson, David Langley, and Linda Allred. So that's our committee. And then Steve Flute, we see you fairly regularly since he is single-handedly trying to preserve everything with history here in this area. And he's doing a great job. He's pretty equal opportunity. It doesn't matter the city or a different county other than Teller. So we appreciate your passion and dedication to all of that. So this afternoon, we have a couple of speakers, all from History Colorado. They are our state resource that helps us around taking care of all of these assets. And they've got great information here that is things that you as property owners can potentially leverage in taking care of your property. Talking about different types of designation that can happen with property. And we got a couple of case studies. They asked us specifically for a couple properties that they could use as examples here locally. So we're pretty excited about that. And I'm going to let each of them self-introduce, since they all have amazing credentials and there's no way I could have pulled that off. So last I knew, Andres was going to be up first to bring us some information. So, and just real quickly, housekeeping, since I do this backwards. Hopefully everybody is signed in on that sheet just so we know who was here. And then out that door on the left is a water fountain, and then around the corner is restrooms if anybody needs to take care of personal business. So thank you, Andres. Welcome. Thank you.
Thank you. Let's see. Let me see if I understand how this works first. No, is it working?
Where does he need to point it, CJ?
It's the, there you go, the down, it's
Okay.
the down arrow.
Got it. All right. Well, thanks everybody. My name is Andres Borunda. I am the and my name will be up on the screen later at the end so you can see it. I am the engagement coordinator for the State Historical Fund, and I'm going to talk a little bit about our grants program, which is most of what I do on a day-to-day. Is I talk to people about our grants program, how to apply, and what we can pay for through this program. So okay, so we always start with the land acknowledgement here. We acknowledge that the land currently known as Colorado has been the traditional homelands of indigenous peoples since time immemorial. We're grateful to work in partnership with the 48 sovereign nations who continue to call this land home. Together, we plan exhibits, collect, preserve, and interpret artifacts, do archaeological work, and create educational programs to share the history of Colorado. So the State Historical Fund, we have existed since 1991, when the Gaming Act, which legalized gambling in Black Hawk, Central City, and Cripple Creek. And that's where our funds come from for these historic preservation projects. We get a portion of that gambling revenue. And over the next few slides, I'll talk a little bit about the different grant types that we have. But here's a short list of some of the kinds of projects that we see. It can be anything from identifying historic sites through surveys, or using planning grants to prepare for larger work, or even to do a nomination, which a little later we'll give you some more information about how to get your building designated and what that process looks like. But we can help fund that process if you need to hire a professional to do it, to help you do it. There's a couple other grant projects that we have, which we'll touch on in a bit. Last fiscal year, which was from July to July, we awarded 113 grants total, just under $11 million across the state to different kinds of projects. So next, we'll just talk real quick about who can apply. And I forgot to ask, do we have, just to get a general sense of who's here? Is it mostly homeowners? Do you own commercial buildings? How many homeowners do we have? Raise some hands, good. Commercial buildings or, okay, good. And are maybe some nonprofits that own their buildings or anything like that? No? Okay. Okay, so you can apply if you're a private individual who owns your own building, but there's a process to do that. So in order to apply, you have to be either a nonprofit organization or a government entity. If you're a private owner, you need to go through one of these to apply for a grant. We can't give you the money directly. You have to partner with an organization to do that with you. So some examples of some older projects in Teller County. Private owner that partnered with the Southern Teller County Focus Group, which was a nonprofit to work on the Doyle block. The Midland Days at Divide is a nonprofit that owns the building, but they also partnered with another nonprofit to help them run the grant. So you can also do that to work on the Midland Depot. Next up, let's see. Okay. Oh. So first, we have two different grant programs essentially, and one of them is a non-competitive grant program, and the other one is a competitive grant program. So we're going to talk about the non-competitive first. And what that means is there's a pot of money set aside at the start of the fiscal year for these types of projects. And there's no deadline. You can apply at any time until we run out of that bucket of money. So we get the money in July. Last fiscal year, we ran out in February. So you have about that window of time if you're looking at any of these smaller projects. They can fund up to $15,000 for different things to get you started. The most common is probably the planning grant, which is just above the emergency grant there, which is usually used to get a building that's not designated, to get that building designated. So somebody will come to us for a planning grant, they'll use that money to hire a professional who's going to help them through the designation process. This is usually step one. A building has to be designated either at the local, state, or national level to be eligible for our grants. So this is usually where you want to start. If you don't have a designated building yet, but you know the building is historic, there's some digging that you have to do and some paperwork that you have to prepare, you can use the planning grant to hire somebody to help you do that. It can also be used though for cost estimates. If you already kind of have an idea, you want to get a project started, but you need some cost estimates, construction documents, blueprints, other kinds of things like that. Basically anything before you actually start doing anything to the building, you can use a planning grant to get you started, no deadline. So this is usually where we recommend people to start. There's similar types of projects for archaeological projects, if that's what's going on in your property. A survey plan can also help you prepare to do a survey for an area to identify historic properties. And a historic structure assessment can help you learn more about your building, the history of the building, but also its current conditions and what the priorities are to make sure that it's sticks around for a long time. The other one I'll talk about just real quick is the emergency grant, just to make sure that you all know it exists and kind of how it works. There is a process. We'll usually ask you a bunch of questions. Have you gone through your insurance yet? We'll try to figure out the best way for you to get your building recovered, but the emergency grant is there to help in cases where there's more funding needed. We can give up to $15,000 for historic buildings that are designated that have been damaged by a natural disaster. And the last one is just the micro grant. I'll just talk about that real quick. It's up to $5,000. It's much smaller, but it can help you do any range of projects. If you can get something fixed with that amount of money, you can come to us and just get that one particular part of your building fixed. Or it's usually used to help put on like a workshop or a conference or something that's related to historic preservation in your community, in your area. So these are our non-competitive grants, no deadline, and we'll talk in a little bit about the cash match. Next up is our competitive grants. These are much larger. We can give you up to $250,000 to work on your historic building. This can be planning as well if your planning project requires that much money, or it can be actually doing something to a building, fixing a roof, working on the windows, the doors, the foundation, whatever it needs to be. Of course, it's also open to archaeology projects, education projects, and other training projects, as long as these are related to historic preservation. It's a competitive grant round, so we have 2 deadlines a year, once in April and once in October. The eligibility requirements are basically the same. If you're a private owner, you've got to go through a different organization. The building has to be listed as historic on either the local, state, or national register, etc. Before you apply, you need to send us a letter of intent, and you can just talk to me or anybody at our office, and we can send you some information about what should be in that letter. But you're basically just telling us that you're going to apply for a competitive grant. We make sure that it's eligible, and then we give you the application so you can go forward. And then,
Can I clarify?
oh,
If it's locally designated, it qualifies?
it does. Yeah, as long as it's designated through a local register, you do need to provide proof of that local designation when you apply, but it does qualify. Good question, thank you.
What if the building has been moved?
I mean, we could still work on it. I think we would need some more information just to make sure. I mean, if the building is on the register and the work is eligible, then we should still be able to look at that application. It's really just a matter of how competitive you can make it in terms of presenting it to reviewers, but you'd be eligible to apply if the building is designated as historic. And we can help you as well. We do just, before we move off of the competitive grants, we do also review drafts for first-time applicants. So if you're not sure if it's very competitive, we can look at that application and give you some advice on how to present that better. And of course, you know, there's a lot of grant writers around the state that already have experience with our reviewers that might be able to give you some good advice. Okay, the next thing is our cash match. And this is a part of any grant. And there's a lot of information in here, but I'm not going to read it all off the screen. What I'll just say is, if you are going to apply, you can talk to me and I can tell you exactly what your cash match is going to be. But essentially, for nonprofits, you get a slightly lower cash match than private owners. And this just depends on the ownership of the building. If it's owned by a private individual or a private business, it has a higher cash match than if it's owned by a nonprofit or a government entity. We do offer reduced cash matches. If the cash match is too high, you'll have to explain why that is necessary. And then we do also have a reduced cash match for projects that specifically benefit BIPOC communities, which stands for Black, Indigenous, or People of Color. There's basically a waiver section that you have to fill out, and you have to make the argument showing how your project does that. And if you can do that, you can qualify for the reduced cash match. But that reduced cash match is also available just in general. You just have to make the argument and show us that you've tried to raise the money, maybe you just couldn't quite get there, and we can help you work out that argument. But just know that it exists, and there's a cash match required for all of our grants except for emergency grants. If there's an emergency grant, there's no cash match required on your part. And the way this works is it's based on the project total. It's not based on the request amount. But again, if you are interested in grants, we can talk about that more once you start getting closer to that period. Last thing here that I'll wrap up with is just a quick case study to show a project that basically started from what you're looking at here, an older building that wasn't in the best shape. And they used 4 grants through the State Historical Fund. We gave them a total of $609,000. They put up 580 of their own dollars. It was close to $1.2 million in total, but we were able to get this building designated. It was not designated when this process started, so it wasn't historic. We helped them make it historic, and then we helped them get some documents, and then we did a couple different phases of stabilization and rehabilitation to get it to a much better shape. Today, this building is the visitor center over in Yamba. It's the town hall. And so in this slide shows you what it looks like here closer to now. And then in the next slide here, you're looking at a timeline just to kind of show a realistic sort of expectation of what a process like this might look like. The town of Yamba purchased the building in 2006. It was not on the register. In 2008, they got it listed on the Routt County, which is the local register for that area. Once you get it on that register, they're eligible for grants with us. So they came in 2010, we gave them a historic structure assessment grant, which helped them figure out the conditions of the building, what needed to be done first. And then starting in 2012, on the bottom where it says spring 2012, they did a first phase of stabilization. In 2014, they did a second phase, and in 2017, a third phase. Finally, the building opened in 2018. So this is a 12-year process you're looking at, but it can be done. This building was not even on the register when this process started. So let's see. Up next, there's some resources. We're not going to read these, obviously, but we have this PowerPoint available. We can send it out if you're interested. I'll leave my business card. You guys can reach out and I can send you all this information. All of this is available on our website. We're currently in the middle of a grant round. In the next couple of weeks, we have a deadline coming up, but we will get you the information that you need as soon as you need it. And right here is my contact information. So if anybody needs that, you can take a picture of that, but I'll also leave my cards here for you guys to take home. I can take any questions now, or yeah, if anybody has any questions about grants. We're going to talk a little bit later about different programs that we have, different tax credits and other programs that we have. Okay, cool. Thanks, everyone.
All right. Hi, everyone. My name is Sarah Capel. I am the tax credit and incentive specialist here at our Colorado State Historic Preservation Office. So today I'll be talking about both the state and the federal tax credit programs that we have available. In every state, there is a state historic preservation office, and they do have federal historic tax credits. Here in Colorado, we are one of, I think, like 40 or some states that actually have a state tax credit program. It's very robust compared to some, and maybe not as robust to others. Do I need to speak into them?
Yes, it's word.
Oh, I'm so sorry. I'll start over.
We can free this so that you can walk around if you're.
I know one of my other colleagues will probably also want to walk around, so yeah, I'll start this. AKA Eric.
I understand.
Awesome. Okay. Yeah, for the recording, my name is Sarah Capel. I am the tax credit and incentive specialist. Here in Colorado, we do have the federal historic tax credit, but we also have a state historic tax credit for both residential and commercial. I consider us one of the lucky states because there are others who maybe have like 100,000 in credits to give out a year. Like it's actually really nothing in comparison to our 10 million that we get every year. So but then you get some other states like Georgia and New York who seem to have unlimited funding in some cases, and ours looks very measly. But we're gonna stay positive, and ours is fabulous. And being able to pair them and talk more about it with our state historical fund grants that Andres just talked about, we actually have a very robust preservation program here in Colorado. Works for me, Andres. So where to start? So Woodland Park is a certified local government, which is great. So you have people here in Woodland Park, and it sounds like even people who might not be on city staff that are very passionate about the history of the area. So being able to just know historic sites and which buildings are what are a great place to begin. Because if you don't know what you have, then how do you know what you need to apply for or what kind of questions to be asking? If you have a survey completed, that's always a good a place to start also, and that's also a requirement of the Certified Local Government Program. So we oftentimes refer to those as, here, this owner should, if they have work they want to do, they should definitely come talk to us at our office. Or you can just reach out to the state office. Or if you have questions specifically about the tax credit program, that could be me. But if you contact any of our staff, they'll be happy to, answer the questions, or if they don't know, they'll send you to me. We work well with Main Street communities, and then also our certified local government program, which is why we're here. And as you can see, Woodland Park is listed. So the first one I'll start off with is the state commercial tax credit. So like I said, we get 10 million every calendar year. And so January 5th is normally when our pool gets replenished. That 10 million then gets split into two pots, 5 million each for small projects or large projects. So we did, this has been the way because we really want rural communities or communities that aren't, Denver or even, Front Range to be able to benefit from the tax credit. So, we get those large Denver projects that can eat up the 10 million in a heartbeat. So we do have the two separate ones. So the small is for projects 10 million or less than estimated qualified expenses or eligible work. We'll just go with that. And then anything that projects that are $2 million and $1 and up will go into that large pool. So who qualifies? Designated properties. So those that are listed individually or contributing on a state or national register or within the district, or being a certified local government. If you're locally landmarked, that does have you eligible for being qualified for the program. What's another great thing is you don't, versus the grants where you have to be designated in order to apply from the start, you just have to be designated by the end of the project. And so happy to talk about what those timelines could be if that's the way to go. But I really kind of, emphasize and encourage looking at local landmarking under the certified local government if that's an option. So a lot of people think private owners because it's tax credit. So how is this going to benefit me as a nonprofit? Well, we changed our statute to where our tax credits are transferable. And so not only private owners who have a tax liability can benefit from the program, but so can a 501c who is found tax exempt under the federal code. So you can do the work. I like easy math. So say you do $100,000 in work and being in Woodland Park and it's a rural community, you can get $35,000 back in credits. Now you're a 501c3, you don't have a tax liability, you can then turn around and sell those for a discounted rate because there's people who want to buy these, and if they can save some money any which way, they're going to, they'll be like, I'll buy them for $30,000. So then they're saving $5,000. You're getting $30,000 back that you can put in your pocket. You can invest it into your building for your next phase. There's all sorts of options. And that's what makes this program also a real good incentive when it comes to doing preservation work. Long-term leases, 5 years for rural compared to the 40 years for urban. So that's also a perk because some people, in small communities, there's like, you're asking me to sign a 40-year lease. Like, oh my gosh, like that's too much for me. But a 5 years is a little bit more reasonable and definitely something that, okay, I can go into this for 5 years. Qualified expenses for the tax rate is 25 to 35%. In rural community, it's 30 to 35%, and that's again based off. This moves. Okay, based off of your estimated qualified expenses. It's a cap of $1 million per year per project. So if you have a very large project, I recommend talking to myself or the other individual who helps manage this project or this program, just to make sure that all your ducks are in a line, and we're gonna get as many credits as we can. And you can keep or sell them. So they are for a private owner, they are dollar to dollar for your state income tax. Or they can keep some, sell some. If you're a nonprofit, you can sell all of them. So whatever, meets your needs. And then if you decide to keep them, they are a max of 10 years to use them. And if come 9.5 and you haven't used them all, you can still sell them. So it's fabulous. So I did say we have a residential tax credit program. The designation is the same if you are state or national register, or if you are locally landmarked under that certified local government. It is for private owners. So it must be considered a primary residence. This could be, your first, your second, or your third, whatever home. But it must be for your private use and not for generating revenue. And then it's 20 to 35%. It's 35% flat in a rural community with a cap of 50,000. So say you do 400,000 in work, it's still only going to be 50,000. So and that is applied towards your taxes. They are non-transferable. So you have 10 years to use them. Say I do work on a house and then I get my 50,000 in credits or however many. I decide, I'm going to move. The credits stay with you. And so they start over on the home. So if the next owner comes in and they're like, oh, I don't know why they didn't fix the windows or whatever, they can still apply for the program and get their credits for themselves. So what qualifies? Basically anything. We really don't have, something that looks more preservation-y or, flashy than others. So masonry, windows, roof foundation, the normal. And then interior. So buildings are meant to change. Rehabilitation means, adaptive reuse. So a popular one nowadays is converting schools that have been decommissioned into housing. So, you want a 2-bedroom, 1 bath and a giant classroom versus a really giant studio. So build outs in order for that adaptive reuse to, be successful. Any kind of the pretty details or the plaster, the wall finishes, trim, doors, whatever it might be. And then your big ticket items of mechanical, electrical, plumbing, those things that people are like, oh my gosh, I need a new water heater, but it's going to cost a lot, or maybe you're converting from, and I don't know if that's the case up here, but from steam to electric, you need a new system, totally qualified. For the tax credits, it has to be what's located within the building footprint. So I like to just start off as a easy test is if I take my building, turn it upside down, give it a good shake, what falls out most likely doesn't qualify, and what stays in most likely does. So there are a few exceptions, but you can definitely ask, and I'll help you weed out what are qualified and non-qualified expenses. And then I just, encourage you to just talk to staff early. We like coming on these outings, so you put a face to the name, so you're not just calling us and be like, oh, who is this person? So we're friendly. Yes, we work for the state, but we're really nice and we like talking to people. So the application process, it's a 2-part application. The commercial is jointly managed by our office and then also the Office of Economic Development and International Trade. Really long name. If I slip up and say edit, that's what I mean. But I get to do the fun work. I get to look at the pretty pictures and make sure things meet the standards. And my counterpart at the other office, he does the numbers. So that's why I like easy math. So if you ask me a math question, we can work through it, but it's not my strong suit. So the 2-part application, the part 1 is in the initial application. It's really a lot of what we need. So before photos, there's general stats, what you're gonna do. And I always encourage, you might think you're like, yeah, I need, I might get to it. You think you might get to it, encourage it include it, because we can't add after you've submitted, but we can definitely take away. So if you say you're gonna do roof, windows, foundation, you only do the roof and foundation and not the windows, that's fine. We can move that to the next phase. But you need to include it to begin. So if you do get to it, you can claim credits on it. So again, talk to me. I'll be happy to plan that out with you. And then once you get it all done, you are going to apply for your issuance. And those are all the pretty after photos showing here, I did what I said I was gonna do. And then your final, the final numbers, and it all goes into this very well formatted worksheet that my counterpart has created. It's all online, but I do have blank applications that I'm happy to share with those who are like, what kind of questions they're gonna be asked. And I also think, I mean, personally, I like going in with all my information ready, so I'm not like taken off guard. So I'm happy to share that and go over any of those questions. And also myself and my counterpart, Christopher at OEdit, we do courtesy reviews. So if you start working on something, you're like, I just don't know if this is quite right, you can shoot it over to us and we'll take a look. And then the residential, very similar. The only difference is it just only comes to our office. And then my director signs off on it, and then I put it into our system, and bada bing, it's done. But it's very similar, same information. You're just working more directly with just me. So hopefully that's okay with you all if you come to a project. And you can send it to me in any form. It's not all online. You can snail mail it to me. You can email it to me. You can be like, I'm gonna be in Denver. Can I swing by the office and drop it off? That's fine too. I'm pretty flexible. And again, I will do a courtesy review. And I will say for both the commercial and the state, there are review fees, and that is dependent on how much your project's going to cost. And so again, if you kind of want to know, you can just call and I can help you figure that out. So some pros and cons. Again, I don't think there's any cons to this, but I list them because you can't really have pros without cons. But anyway, the program is meant to help work be done right. So good example is, and this can go with grants too, like windows. A wood window is going to be $3,000 and a vinyl window is $1,500. You're gonna be like, well, the vinyl window is cheaper, but you're not gonna get the incentives. You're not gonna qualify for the tax credit and or grants. But the reason why, it's called an incentive is so you do it right. And so we would like to see wood windows or something compatible, but we can talk about alternative materials based on project. But I like to, say that for the program, and maybe the program's not a good fit for you. Maybe you're just like, I'm gonna do vinyl, whether you like it or not. And be like, have fun, best of luck with your project. It aligns well with the federal historic tax credit if they're on the National Register and it's commercial only. The next slide kind of goes over that. I like to say it's double dipping and it's totally legal. So if you do both tax credits, state and federal, so you also get a state historical fund grant, all legal, and it's fabulous. And so we always encourage leveraging programs too. So if you go in for a state historical fund grant, there is a question where we ask, well, where's your cash match coming from? What other sources of funding are you getting? And so that's part of my job as in tax credits and incentives is to make sure that's all getting captured. Available to projects that are locally landmarked. Some people are hesitant to get locally landmarked, but I also encourage that if you have work and you're just like, well, I don't know if it'll meet, your specifications and your, be accepted by you, throw it over to me. And before you get locally landmarked, maybe that's the deciding factor. You're like, okay, I'll get locally landmarked if my work qualifies. Happy to help have that conversation. A lot of people think that we're going to tell you that you can't do something, and it'll be fine, I promise. And then it's an extra boost to the rural communities. You also were at our office trying to do more of a promoting our projects, and so that could also be a perk to applying for any of our programs. And also the selling of the credits for the commercial bit. So you can sell them, then you can reinvest them back in your building, however it might be, but most times those credits are staying in the community, which is great. The cons, might be the hesitation is whether it meets the Secretary of Interior standards for rehabilitation. Sounds intimidating, but normally what you want for your building is what's best, and I only want what's best for your building, so I feel like we can align on some shared interest. So sometimes, it's not the case. And the municipalities and government agencies can't apply for the tax credits directly, but we all know in rural communities that there's that building that's that vacant on Main Street, and the only way it's gonna get saved is if the town buys it. Then the town's like, what do I do with it? Well, let's reflect back on that 5-year lease. Maybe you have a nonprofit or someone in town who's just like, well, I need a space, but I can't buy my own building. Maybe the government entity could work out an agreement and lease that space with the intent that that leasee fixes up the building. And then they can benefit from the tax credit. So there are ways. And then the federal tax credits, it's unlimited funding. We only get 10 million out of state. The federals have all the money. But it's a flat 20%, so it doesn't have a cap. And you must be individually or contributing to the National Register, and it is best suited for private owners, LLCs, or partnerships. Again, encourage leveraging funding, as long as all projects are met between all the programs, and it doesn't have to be just preservation ones. We pair nicely with housing. There are certain DOLA grants. There are a number of things, like even private granting agencies. So just make sure that you're meeting everyone's requirements. And be realistic about your timeline. I have so many people who are like, I'm gonna have this done in 12 months. I was like, cool, I'll see you in 18 months. So be open to flexibility. Don't get mad when I, try to be realistic. And that's the end of my presentation. This is my contact information. I have cards. Happy to answer any questions now or at the end of the presentations or as they come. So yeah, I don't know. Are we taking questions now? I know Andres had to leave, so. Okay, any questions? Yes.
A lot of people that I run across are under the misconception that if they have their building, a lot of people that I run across have the misconception, and you touched on it briefly, that if they have a building that's designated state, local, or national, that they can't do anything that they would like to do with it. And I wish you guys would stress that if their building is nominated, that they could burn it down the very next day if they want, unless there's local ordinances that prevent them. But you could burn that building down if it's on the National Register even.
I'll talk about the local landmark, but I don't want to steal Eric's thunder here in the next one, so.
Okay, Eric. But it really matters a lot. And so many people, there's the majority of people that I run across feel that that's it, that they're really trapped then, and they're not.
And I think that's important. I mean, having Lindsay, she goes through the ordinance and, some are more strict than others. So it just depends community to community. But I've run into ones where people have been, they're like, well, I don't want to get local landmark, but your incentives sound like a good deal. But I have work that I don't know if it'll pass, but they don't want to take that step to get local landmark. So I just tell them, like, shoot me over your work plan and we'll go over it. And maybe there is something that I'm just like, well, that, want to be approved, but maybe have you considered doing it this way? And a lot of times they're like, oh, like, well, for the incentives, yeah, I will do it that way. But yeah, like I said, like it just depends community for the serve local government and what their review of the project is. But in the end, it comes to my desk, and I'm happy to work with people. And I encourage that if you're doing work to make sure you talk to us first, so that way we can have the conversation where you're just like, vinyl windows, and I'm like, well, maybe how about these windows? And they'll be like, okay, that's acceptable. And I'll be like, I was like, and because you were such a good sport about that, I'll work with you on this other item that I was kind of like sticking to it. So, but yeah, I know. Yeah, local landmark has a little bit other things, but like I said, Eric will talk next. Other questions? I also really love talking about timelines and leveraging different funding. So if after this, you're just like, oh, I want to do tax credits and maybe SHF grants, or you have different things, you can definitely reach out to me if it seems all intimidating. Okay, I think it's Eric. Eric's up.
Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Eric Newcomb. I'm one of the state and national register historians at History Colorado. The other state and national register historian is actually with us here. Damian Pachoda is in the back. Damian and I split the state. I handle the southwestern portion of the state, and Damian handles the northern and the eastern portion. So you guys and Steve are stuck with me for the foreseeable future. So my presentation today is to talk to you guys about what the state and national register of historic places are. Mainly, I'd like to talk about what the program is, what some of the myths are regarding the nomination that Steve talked about a little bit about, and how the process works. Ideally, by the end of this, I hope that you would have a little bit more of an understanding about the state and national register of historic properties and the process. You definitely won't know all the ins and outs because there are some specifics that will have to be covered at another time, but hopefully you'll get the general gist here about what the state and national register are. Okay. The state and national register, or the National Register of Historic Places and the State Register of Historic Properties are our nation and our state's official list of properties that are significant in American history and that are worthy of preservation, or these properties that should be preserved. It serves several purposes, but there are often many myths associated with these two programs as well that are worth covering as we talk about what these two things are. That being said, there are 5 main elements that I like to cover when it comes to the state and national register of historic properties. And the first of which is that the main goal of these programs is to provide honorary recognition to historic properties in our counties, in our state, and at the national level. These nomination forms, which contain an accurate description of the historic resource and an argument about why that resource or why that place is historically significant, is meant to be part of the historic record as this process. When you're listed in the state or national register of historic places, the story of your place becomes a part of the American record of our history. It's either housed at the National Archives in Washington, D.C., if you're listed on the National Register of Historic Places, or it's archived at the Colorado, at History Colorado as part of the historic, as part of our story of historic places. And ultimately, rather than placing regulations or even protections on it, the goal of this program is to provide honorary recognition and to celebrate these historic places and to provide access through tax incentives and grants to preserve them for the future. In addition, these programs also significantly build the knowledge base of the history of our properties. As I said, these nomination forms often contain historic information and historic stories about places that might not receive other historic research. And so these nomination forms contain history that is valuable to places because it provides additional knowledge and information about them. We often find that certain towns and cities use these national register or state register nominations not only to celebrate these historic places, but also to help educate their citizens about the history of their town as well. Now, in addition, being listed on the state or national register of historic places does also increase and raise the level of public awareness of historic sites. Being listed in the state or national register is often accompanied by some form of public awareness or a plaque, amongst other things, and some media attention. And so it can also raise the notoriety of these historic places, which can help to ensure their preservation and their longevity over time. So this can also be a tool to ensure that those historic places that are important to you all are brought to the public's knowledge, amongst other things. And as my colleague Sarah and Andres mentioned before, being listed on the state or national register of historic places are one of the ways that you can access preservation tax credits to help preserve your place, as well as state historic fund grants that we're very lucky to have here in Colorado to help preserve these places. As Sarah and Andres said, you can be listed at the local level as well to access those things, but at the state or national level is another way that you can access those grants. I come from Montana most recently, where I worked at their state historic preservation office, and we had about $10,000 a year to give to historic places. Here in Colorado, we're very, very lucky to have so much money to give to historic places for their preservation. I believe Andres said close to $10 million a year that we can give to help preserve these places. So this is a tremendous, tremendous benefit that I encourage you to take advantage of. Now, as Steve said, this is maybe the biggest myth that we face in the historic preservation industry, and it is that a lot of people believe that by listing your property in the State Register of Historic Properties or the National Register of Historic Places, that there is going to be a set of restrictions imposed upon this property by either the state government or the federal government. The truth of the matter is that being listed in the state or national register does not place any restrictions on the property owner or the property as a result of listing. You will not be required to keep your property open. Nobody will come to inspect your property from the state or federal government. You will not be required to change ownership of your property as a result of listing. This is absolutely an honorary program and does not affect that one way or another. In addition, as Steve said, you could list your property tomorrow and the very next day decide to demolish or alter that property without any oversight or without any restriction from the state or federal government. Now, there's two very important caveats to those statements. And the first of which is that if you are locally landmarked, meaning that you have decided to designate your property through the local process, there are often more legal restrictions or legal restrictions in place as a result of local landmarking. And we can't specifically state what those restrictions might be because each locality makes their own ordinances and makes their own laws about what might be required for places that are locally landmarked. But at least at the state or federal level, you will receive no restrictions and no oversight from the state or federal government. The second important caveat there to note is that if you use state money, meaning that if you use money from a state agency or from a federal agency, there is a process, if you use money from a state agency or a federal agency to do something to your historic property, there is a process that you have to go through to ensure that you are using that state or federal money to alter your property that will both accomplish the goal that you're trying to achieve while also protecting the historic qualities of that property. But again, that's only if you are using state agency money or money from a federal agency. Otherwise, the law is very clear here. A private property owner can do what they would like with their private property, listed or otherwise. Excellent. So when we're talking about properties that can be listed on the state or national register of historic places, we want to talk about certain types of properties that can be listed. The most common, of course, are buildings, individual buildings, whether that be residential places, commercial locations, or some combination of the two. But these are individual buildings that have some sort of historic importance. We also list sites, so locations where historic places happen. Oftentimes we think about sites in the context of battlefields or where something important occurred that isn't associated with a structure or with some sort of built piece. Now, in addition, the National and State Register programs also list structures, which are built elements that are not made for human habitation, as well as objects, so things like statues or art or other built environment pieces. And finally, we also list historic districts, which are a combination of buildings or resources that, when taken together, make a historic resource in and of themselves. A historic district is often best thought of as a main street in a Colorado town, where all of those main street buildings taken together constitute a downtown district or a Main Street district. Whereas individually, they might not be really historic. The combination of them together makes a singular Main Street that is very historic. In the state and national register program, there are these two pillars that define what it means to be historic. One of these pillars is significance. And why is a property or why is a building significant in American history or in Colorado history? Once we understand why a property might be considered significant or why it might be considered historic, we need to ensure that it has enough historic integrity to be able to display that significance. As we know, buildings and properties change over time. Nothing is stagnant in time. Everything is altered. And as those alterations occur throughout time, sometimes places lose their ability to showcase why they are historically significant. For example, if we had a fantastic Queen Anne residence that had all of this ornamentation and beautiful scroll work and shingles in the gables, amongst other things. Every time we change one of those features, we remove the shingles from the gables, or we take away the scroll work from the porch, or we add a new element to that building, we're altering its ability to explain its architectural significance. And that can occur in other ways as well with different types of historic properties. Now, the one piece I do like to talk about here is that integrity is different from condition. Condition describes the current status of a property, meaning that it might be in poor maintenance. There might be a hole in the roof. There might be, weeds growing around the property. But those elements that describe how it was historically are still intact. It's in the same location. The setting around the property has not changed very much. The historic materials that were used when it was built are still present. Its architectural design or how it was designed is still apparent, even though some of those elements may have been run down. Certain aspects of workmanship, particularly in brick or timber created structures, are still apparent. And its historic association and feeling are there. Historic integrity is a little bit difficult to understand, even for us practicing professionals. There's a lot of subjectivity to it. And so I'd be happy to talk more about that if you have a question. But these two elements, significance and integrity, are what we use to determine whether or not something is historic. Significance in the National and State Register program is defined by 4 criteria. So there are 4 main reasons why a property might be considered historic. Criterion A says that properties can be significant for their association with a singular event in history or a pattern of events in history. So something historic happened in this location, or this location is a part of a pattern of events in history that makes it historic, and therefore it should be preserved in order to understand that pattern. Properties can also be considered significant for their association with important people. An important person in our town's history worked in this location: a banker, a mercantilist, an author, an artist. And these places need to be associated with the productive life of that person. For example, we wouldn't necessarily list Steve Jobs's birthplace, the inventor of the Apple computer. We wouldn't necessarily list his birthplace. But the garage where he invented the Apple computer absolutely is historic, because it tells us about his mindset and the location in which he was when he did this very historic, important thing. So there's that little bit of that quirk there for criterion B. Criterion C properties are properties that are historic for their architectural value, for as being emblematic of an architectural style, the work of a master architect, or of a different property type in particular. Now, criterion D, is officially for properties that are have the potential to yield information. And we typically think of these properties as archaeological properties, where if we dug them up, if we saw what artifacts were within there, we would learn something more about the people associated with those properties. So we want to make sure that we protect those in case we ever decide to see what information they might yield. Now, this isn't only for architectural, archaeological properties. Some buildings can yield information as well. It's rare, but it can happen. Finally, for the state register only, there's an additional criteria of significance, which is for geography or properties that are associated with geographic location. The best example here is the Palmer Star. How many of you have seen the Palmer Star up in Palmer? One at least. Okay, yes. There's this big star. They light it up on the mountain and everybody can see it for miles. And so they listed it on the State Register of Historic Properties as a property associated with geographic identity or geographic location. Because people could say, well, once I see where the Palmer Star is, I know where I am in the land, amongst other things. Yeah. Okay. The nomination process is very similar for the State Register and the National Register. There are a couple differences, but ultimately it follows these steps. Number one, you're going to contact staff at History Colorado, primarily me or Damien, to see if your property is eligible for listing. This eligibility determination means that we as historians and you as the property owner are taking a look at this property to see if it meets one of those criteria of significance, and if it has enough historic integrity to convey that significance. This eligibility determination is important because when something is determined eligible, we want to make sure that you can be able to list it in one of those properties in either the state or national register of historic places. You work with us at History Colorado to investigate and research the history, and we make an argument as to whether or not your property is eligible for listing. Okay? Once you receive that eligibility determination, you work to complete and submit either a state register nomination form or a national register nomination form. We as historians at History Colorado, we can't quite do that form for you, but we're happy to work with you to help prepare that form and find resources for you to complete that form to the best of your ability. Once you complete that nomination form, you're submitting that form to the Colorado Historic Preservation Review Board, or the State Review Board. That's second step there. Steve has gone through this process, so he knows that the State Review Board is made up of 12 to 15 historians, archaeologists, and others in the field that read the nomination and provide feedback on the nomination to make sure that it meets that criteria of significance and has enough integrity to display that significance. The Colorado State Review Board can approve nominations to send them off to the National Park Service. They can send them back for additional edits and revisions, or they can deny them, but that's very, very rare. In the case of the State Register, the Colorado State Review Board is the second to last step. We take it from the State Review Board and we send it to the History Colorado Board, and they approve those nominations. It's a bit of a quicker process, and it's meant to be for properties that have a little bit of a diminished integrity that might not quite be at that national level. In the National Register of Historic Places, you are ultimately applying to the National Park Service for listing. And so after the Colorado State Review Board, we send it off to the National Park Service for their review and final listing. Takes an additional 45 days and a little bit more time, but you're at that national level, that highest significance that we can give you. As I said, there are two historians at History Colorado that work in the National and State Register program, Damien Pachona and myself. You guys here in Teller County are with me, so you'd be working directly with me on the State or National Register of Historic Places. Okay, my contact information is here. I don't have a fancy picture like Sarah or Andres. I will work on that to make sure I get a fancy picture. But other than that, hopefully this has given you a pretty broad overview of what these two programs are. Don't get me wrong, there are minutiae and details that I'd be happy to go over with you if you have additional questions, but hopefully this sparks some interest in your mind about what properties you might think about listing and which histories you might want to preserve here in Woodland Park. Okay. Anybody have any questions? Yes, sir.
Quick question. What's the benefit if you're already locally designated to moving to a state or a national designation?
Some properties want the notoriety that comes with being listed on the State Register of Historic Properties or the National Register. Part of it is that notoriety. Other properties want that deeper level of research and that deeper level of historic investigation. And sometimes that comes as a result of the level of the program itself. Oftentimes, local landmarking nomination forms have extremely deep research that just the property owner is very zealous about doing. But that National Register of Historic Places has a little bit of a higher bar with what we're going to consider is the argument needed there. And so it's that deeper dive research, it's a bit of that deeper story to it. So the notoriety, the research, some people want their story archived at that level to make sure that they're a part of the American record. They see some value in that. And then of course, there is a bit of a competitive advantage to being listed on the National Register of Historic Places when considering tax incentives and other grants. It is that a bit of a tiered element to there. So we would consider properties listed at the National Register of Historic Places to have a slight advantage. In addition, as Sarah explained, if you're seeking out federal tax credits, you got to be listed on the National Register of Historic Places. So there are a couple of those elements. That being said, if you just want to apply for a state historic fund grant, all you need is local landmarking listing. So sometimes there may not be a benefit at the state or national register, and we'll give you the honest answer for sure. Just a plug.
I fell asleep.
Oh no, sorry. How many did you sleep?
You know what? Many times like, oh, jump up. You did a great job answering the question, so it's probably captured.
Does this program have a few minutes for us to talk about the criteria for non-active cemeteries?
Ooh, everybody's favorite question. Okay, non-active cemeteries. Cemeteries occupy an interesting place in the National and State Register of Historic Places. Cemeteries can be listed for a couple different reasons. One of which is that cemeteries can be listed for the design of the cemetery itself as a design landscape. Some cemeteries in the American West, but particularly in the American South, are ornate places of memorialization for those that are buried there. And so their design is significant. In the American South, sometimes we look at these as the distinct grid in which they're laid out in, with prominent people placed at certain locations, so that they can be memorialized and interpreted more easily. In the American West, what we often see more is that these cemeteries follow a more rural pattern where there is a lack of organization as a result of the historic context in which they were created for the people that are interred there, amongst other things. And that lack of organization can be an important element to understanding cemeteries as well. So, number one, how is it designed? How is it laid out? The second reason can be for the actual headstones or funeral ornamentation that are placed at the site as well. Some sites have specific types of funerary elements that are present at cemeteries that could be historic or reflective of the context in which they were created and can tell us about the history when those people were buried there. In addition, cemeteries can be listed for the people that are buried there, but this is a very high bar in the National and State Register. You've got to be able to prove that the person that was buried there was not only historically significant for the actions that they did during their life, but that this final resting place is the best place for us to understand a portion of that life. Meaning that there aren't existing historic buildings or other places that are more tangibly connected to this historic person. Does that make sense? Yes. In addition, I think that aside from their design, the funerary elements, and who's buried there, cemeteries can also be listed as a reflection of the history of that place and its surrounding context. What I mean by that is, particularly in the American West and Colorado, cemeteries often reflected different contextual elements of the history that was occurring at that place. There was a prolific disease that year. There was some sort of military action that resulted in a high number of deaths. Few cemeteries can tell us significantly about the history as well. So it might be under that criterion A or a pattern of events in history as well. Yeah, there's a lot of nuance there, but it's one of those ones that is very fun to talk about. Ms. Capel.
Someone asked a question about moved buildings. What, because you were talking about the setting and the association and how. Yeah, you'll talk about it.
Definitely. So one of those aspects of the historic integrity is location. So is the building in the same location that it was historically? And that, it may seem like an obvious aspect of integrity, and it is when the building is significant for a pattern of events or a singular event, because we want to be able to understand that historic event in the place that it occurred. And so location becomes particularly important there. In addition, it is the most visceral, tangible link that we have between the history that occurred there and our current state, is that locational element. That being said, so location becomes a very important aspect of integrity when it comes to a moved property and understanding what occurred there. That being said, if the building is significant for its architectural qualities, for what the building is designed or how it was made, its location becomes somewhat less important, because if we took a craftsman building or one that has one of your guys' fantastic chimneys that I'm super jealous of, and we moved it from one location to another, that chimney is still in existence. It still is designed in the same way. It still has those features that make it particularly significant. It just moved from over there to over here, in which case it wouldn't be that big of a deal.
Gotta talk about that.
Can we open Pandora's box?
When will the Department of Interior ever realize that, let's say schoolhouses, for example, they moved them many times. One schoolhouse could have been moved 8, maybe 10 times, depending on the population of the children of the area. They'd move them. So when is the Department of Interior going to recognize that fact and let us designate nationally buildings that have been moved?
It's a fair question, and unfortunately, I don't have an answer. I would love to be able to say next month, next year, the time after that, but all we can do is continue to ask the Department of Interior and get their answer. Right now, they'd say location is still the most foundational link to historic integrity that we have, but all we can do is ask.
Sawmill sets.
I know. Trust me, you're preaching to the choir on that one.
Thanks.
All right, any other questions? Thank you very much, everybody. I'll pass it off to Lindsay Llewellyn here.
Well, thanks, everybody. I'm Lindsay Llewellyn. I'm the preservation planner and the certified local government coordinator at History Colorado. So my main role is to work with local governments on their preservation programs, primarily work with certified local governments, but I'm also happy to do outreach and provide resources to local governments that aren't CLGs. So I was just in meeting with the Teller County Historic Preservation Advisory Board, I think three or 4 weeks ago. So I was just up here for that, as well as working with Karen and the Woodland Park Historic Preservation Board. So we've already talked about historic preservation and how that's seen on the national level as the preservation of buildings, structures, sites, objects, and districts. The structure that we work under, federally and then as a state and then with your local government is outlined here. It was put into place with the National Historic Preservation Act in 1966. Which was then amended in 1980 to add in local government programs. So at the federal level, historic preservation programs go through the National Park Service. And that really happens because our structured preservation programs came out of trying to protect archaeological sites from looting, which is then why a lot of our national parks were created. So our preservation programs really come through the Department of the Interior and through the National Park Service. So even though we think about like Rocky Mountain National Park or something, doesn't necessarily have a ton to do with historic preservation, even though there are historic structures there. But the National Park Service has a whole branch just dedicated to historic preservation programs. So that's what we work with at the federal level. At the state level, every state has its own state historic preservation office, which is History Colorado in Colorado. We also call it the Office of Archaeology and Historic Preservation, which I like to say is because we like to have as many names for the same thing as possible. Lots of acronyms. And then at the local level, you'll have your local historic preservation commission that could be at your town or city level or at the county level. And here, there's obviously both. At each of those levels, there's also nonprofit organizations that work for historic preservation purposes. At the federal level, we have the National Trust for Historic Preservation. At the state level, we have a couple of different statewide nonprofits, including Colorado Preservation, Inc. and Colorado Historical Foundation. And then at the local level, many places will have their own local historical societies that are trying to protect and memorialize histories of local areas. And then some localities also have historic preservation advocacy nonprofits like Historic Denver. There's different groups around that'll be advocating actively with your local government or with the state government to promote historic preservation. So that's the framework that we work in with the federal, state, and local governments. So at the local level, you of course can have your own historic preservation commission without being a certified local government, but we do have a pretty robust certified local government program in Colorado. It's a local government partnership agreement between the National Park Service, the State Historic Preservation Office, and your local government. And essentially, your local government preservation program is being certified by the state and federal governments as fitting within certain parameters set by the federal government and by the state governments. And we're here, to help your local government preservation program and to be a resource to help these programs out. In Colorado, we currently have 68 certified local governments, and there are about 2,100 nationwide. And Woodland Park has been a CLG since 2016. So you can see the different certified local governments on the map here. Currently, we have 6 counties plus Denver and Broomfield, which are their own counties, and then the rest are towns and cities throughout the state. The CLG program and local government preservation programs generally are meant to be really responsive to the needs of your own local community. So we have some programs that are, highly regulatory. So if you have a local landmark, like in Denver, Boulder, Fort Collins, there might be high levels of regulation associated with that status and what you can do with your property if you're locally landmarked in order to protect those properties. But in other places throughout the state, it's more of an honorary program that doesn't really have regulation associated with it. It's just a way to recognize these properties and help to bring incentives for historic preservation into your community. So I think it's just really great that you can shape what will work best in your local community to help promote preservation in a way that makes the most sense to you. So if you are a certified local government, I know I just talked to the Woodland Park Historic Preservation Board about this a couple of months ago, but one of the great benefits that we have for our certified local governments is a certified local government grant program. So we at the State Historic Preservation Office get funding from the federal government, and we're required to pass on a certain percentage of that funding to our certified local governments directly in sub-grants. And since we have the State Historical Fund in Colorado, we're really lucky that we are able to provide a match for those grants through the State Historical Fund to offer no match grants to our certified local governments. And these are for things that will benefit your local government preservation program. So it doesn't cover physical construction projects, but it covers things like preservation plans, survey projects, education and outreach projects that will help move your local preservation program forward. Certified local governments are also eligible for National Park Service grants. So there are a slate of National Park Service grant programs that are specifically for historic preservation. And those do cover physical preservation, construction work in some cases, and then also National Register nominations, survey projects, again, historic context studies and things like that. Certified local government, local landmarks and local properties that are contributing to historic districts are eligible for state, commercial and residential tax credits, like Sarah talked about. And as she said, since you're in a rural area, those are worth 35% of your qualified rehabilitation expenditure. So it's just really great to be able to get, you know, a third of the costs back for your projects. And then certified local governments and regular non-certified local governments, local landmarks are eligible for state historical fund grants. So anyone can apply for those as long as there's some kind of public benefits to the project and you're locally listed with your local government. Certified local governments also get access to Compass, which is our statewide cultural resource database. So you can see all the work that's been done previously for surveys and information collected in your local area. We offer training, so you know that's why we're out here today. It's that Karen and Dory reached out and asked us to come, and we're happy to provide training for our CLGs. And actually, this counts as your CLG requirement for the year, so you can check that off your list. Technical preservation support. So if a question comes up and you're not sure what the best approach is for a historic property, you can reach out to me and I'll find someone at our office that knows how to best handle that issue. For example, we just had an issue in Westminster where they had some graffiti on a historic masonry building. So they reached out to me and I was able to connect them with and the State Historical Fund, who let them know like who to contact for the best products to remove the graffiti and then also what to use to protect the property in the future. So if those types of questions come up, feel free to reach out and we'll connect you to the best resources that we have. You also get a formal role in the National Register review process. You know, you guys are the experts in your local area. So if there was like a National Register nomination that you looked at and you're like, this actually isn't true, then it would be up to the CLG to respond back and say that you don't think the property is worthy for the National Register. But otherwise, most of the time, CLGs are really excited to help support properties and the recognition in their local area. And then you also have a formal role on federal undertakings. So those are projects that are either federally licensed or federally funded. It's often things like cell towers, highway projects and things like that. So the CLGs have a specific role in commenting on if they think that those types of projects might negatively impact historic resources in your local area. And then on the flip side, we have responsibilities associated with certified local governments. So the first one is to enforce your own local preservation ordinance. So part of my job is to make sure everybody's following the rules that they've set for themselves. And that way the public knows what to expect and there's consistency in the processes that are happening through your historic preservation program. Establish and maintain a commission. For a CLG, you need to have at least 5 people on your commission and meet at least 4 times a year. Send meeting minutes in to me and I read everybody's minutes. Provide for adequate public participation and make sure that all of your meetings follow the appropriate open meetings laws and any public hearings follow appropriate public hearing procedures. Maintain a system of survey and inventory, and Dory and Karen have set out the surveys that have happened at Woodland Park in the past up here, if you are interested in taking a look at those. After we're done talking, one person from the CLG needs to attend a SHPO approved training at least once per year, and then submit an annual report. So those are the benefits and responsibilities under the Certified Local Government Program. Just for local government historic preservation programs generally, what we normally see as part of your program are having your own local historic preservation ordinance, whether you're a certified local government or not. That sets out you know, the parameters for establishing a historic preservation commission. It'll tell you how you can locally designate a property and what kind of review of alterations or demolition might take place in your local area. So if you're ever wondering, you know, what the processes that you need to follow are as a property owner or as a historic preservation commission, you go back to your code, and Woodland Park, you know, has their ordinance as part of their municipal code. And then if you're in, you know, outside of the city and just in Teller County, they just passed a historic preservation resolution in February, I think, that would tell you what is going on as part of their historic preservation program. Another element is survey, so that's how you know what you have in your local area. You can't really do historic preservation work unless you know what is there. Surveys, go around to properties, they'll talk about the history of the property, who used the property in the past, and then what changes have happened to the buildings or the sites in the past as well. Designation, so that's being listed on the local, state, or national register. Design review, that's review of alterations to your property, relocation, or demolition of a property. For CLGs, they're required to have some elements of design review in their program, but it doesn't have to be mandatory in order to get a building permit. So it just depends on how your local program works. In some programs, it's more like the Historic Preservation Commission will give you advice on what's best to do with your property from a historic preservation standpoint, but you can still get a building permit to do whatever you want. And then some programs you have to follow exactly what the Historic Preservation Commission says. Another element of local preservation programs is incentives. Those can be a variety of different programs depending on what works with your town budget and town processes. And then advocacy and public education, so doing outreach events like this, or historic walking tours, brochures, trying to help property owners connect with different incentives and things like that. And I think that's it. So if you have any questions about local government historic preservation programs, my primary job is to be a resource for our local governments, and I'm happy to answer any questions for you. But thanks everybody for being here today, and we can answer any questions you have about any of the programs at this time. You guys want to come back up? Sarah?
Was I not?
Oh yeah, the case study.
Okay.
Yes, that's nice.
I promised case studies, so thank you.
Yes, perfect, thank you. Okay, great. Yeah, so we have 3 case studies to talk about that were provided by Dory. To me. And we're going to look at a commercial property, a public property, and then a residential property. So we have this building here, 720 West Highway 24. Here are the things I know about this property. It's privately owned and locally designated. So was the property owner here today? Oh, great. What are some things you might want to do with this property?
I want to take the tunnel back and get where the library was and have that as shopping, but that's probably not.
You're gonna have like a speakeasy in the tunnel or something?
It was before.
Yeah.
Not much right now, our building is set.
Okay,
We'd love to have the outside done, because we just put the roof on.
yeah,
We paid, did the roof ourselves, but the cheap and on the outside and then, restoration.
right. Yeah, so if you're looking at rehabilitation, since you're locally designated in a certified local government, you would be able to get those historic preservation tax credits. So you could get, 35% back on your costs. And then since it's a commercial building, if there is a, argument for public benefit, you could potentially apply for state historical fund grants to layer with those tax credits as well.
When did you do your roof?
We did.
It was last summer. So,
There is a recapture period on tax credits, but it might be too far out.
okay.
Well, great. And being locally designated in a CLG opens you up to those incentives if you wanted to get like the federal tax credits, like Sarah was talking about, which would be the extra 20%. So you have like 55% total in tax credits, then you'd have to be on the national register as an income generating property.
And I guess interesting point of reference, Dory will clarify, this was our first designated property.
Very first property that was designated.
Oh, great. Yeah, that is great.
Historical trivia.
Always very important to have the first one on the list too.
1994, but I have to look at the ordinance.
1994.
And the reason it was designated,
Just so everybody knows, the reason that this particular property was designated back there in about 1994 was because CDOT was going to come through and widen Highway 24. They were going to raise the building. That's why we have the little bypass area that goes around Trout Creek Road now with the frontage road. So the city did an ordinance, and this was the first property that the city created as a local designation, as a local landmark, and that's why that happened. FYI.
Thank you, Lori.
That's very cool. You can see, you know, how the shape of the city was formed by the buildings that you have here.
And I know you said it's up for sale right now. And so I don't know if you're selling it personally or you're working with a realtor, but we try to encourage like the realtor to, you know, this property is eligible for an incentive. So if it's something like like the chinking in that, if that's an expense you don't want to take on, you hope the next owner will. Like maybe that's a selling factor that maybe like if you're trying to get it off your hands, that maybe the realtor could also promote.
We actually did talk about inviting the realtor and we did, so we tried. Yeah, they're all busy. Yeah, everybody is, so, but thank you guys.
Yeah, feel free to give them our cards or Sarah's card.
Right. It's very.
Yeah, and I just took the photos from Google Street View, so. Okay, the next property is this city-owned building that's a cabin with a barn as well. That's on Highway 24. It's city-owned and locally designated.
just designated.
Oh, great.
Designated as of like a week and a half ago.
Yeah.
State want you permitted that application.
Yeah. Well, great. So for this building, if you wanted to do something with the property, it might be a good candidate for state historical funds grants, as long as there's some kind of public benefit to the, you know, final use or continued use of the property. Yeah, since it's city owned, you wouldn't be able to get tax credits unless it was leased out in a 5-year or longer lease to a nonprofit or a private owner.
So with this particular property, I know we have talked in the Historic Preservation Committee about it possibly seeking state designation. This is Mr. Plut's passion here. And that he started that conversation, and we're told that because of some of the additions that are on this, that it's not eligible at this point. So the burning question is there grant funds available now that it's locally designated to look at having some of those additions removed?
Since it's locally designated, it would be eligible for state historical fund grants, but you would need to make sure that it's a competitive application, so.
Yeah, part of that question would be working with the State Historic Fund staff to make sure that some of the additions that you might remove would bring it, would reinstate some of that architectural integrity that was lost as a result of those additions being put on there. So I'd encourage you to work closely with the State Historic Fund staff to see what they think might be within line with that, and they could work with me to work with the historic integrity as well. But now that it's locally landmarked, it's, as Lindsay said, eligible for State Historic Fund grants.
It might be good to think about like a planning grant for that, that might help determine which parts of the building are, you know, best to target.
Thank you.
And those can be non-competitive, so that might be a good place to start. Okay, and then our last case study was this residence at 311 West County Road. Was the owner here for this one? This one is so your last.
They have good taste.
Yeah, we would say it shouldn't, be under C for cute for the criteria, but this one. Yeah, so it's privately owned and it's not designated. So I think, if you were interested in designation, you might have a few options here. I don't know what the history of the property is, but potentially locally listing, often it's easier to be locally listed than state or national register unless there's something really weird in your local ordinance, but I don't think that's the case here in Woodland Park. Or potentially state register, we do see, private residences on the state register. Depending on its significance. That would be something to talk to Eric about, or for local listing for your Historic Preservation Commission here in Woodland Park. Were you thinking about making any rehabilitation or any alterations to this?
Well,
property?
actually, we're looking to new siding, windows and that sort of thing is what to kind of upgrade it. For that way, it's just, it needs it's time.
Yeah.
To be done. But I'm not sure, who to go through to get the ball rolling, to get it on the register, to get the funds and stuff.
Right, so yeah, you would, if you are locally listed or state or national register, then you would qualify for those state residential tax credits. Usually private residences won't qualify for the state historical fund, or they qualify, but they aren't competitive because it isn't like a public use, but you could at least get the 35% back in tax credits.
And for local designation, see Dory, she's our guru, and we can get you the appropriate form and we can talk about it with you and what does that look like? And the fact that this property has already been inventoried, some of that history has been pulled together for you. So there's a hand up already in place if you're really wanting to do that. And I would say at least talk to Dory about the forms, just so you know, and then you can put it on a shelf or turn it in.
Yeah, that's what's great about a well-done survey is you can kind of copy and paste the information over to a landmark form a lot of times.
That's what we do.
Constant survey on this
Okay.
property, so.
It'll be less detailed, right? A good starting point. Sarah?
We did that with the last property we're just talking about in terms of the application. A lot of the survey was part of the local request.
Does Woodland Park get presented with exterior changes? Like they need to.
Listed properties are supposed to come to the Historic Preservation Committee for their review. So that's how we are structured.
So this could be a good example of the CLG and the state office and the property owner working together to make sure that the work will meet the standards and be approved by all parties. So you're not like hearing one thing from the CLG and I'm saying an opposite and vice versa. And then if you want to do local, I totally, support that. But if you're going for local landmark and the expectation that your work's going to be eligible, it'll be good to have a conversation. Cause I know you said windows and, are you going to go with vinyl windows or are you going to, it's one of those, if you touch it, you need to make it, we expect you to make it better. So if there are vinyl windows, we want, instead of replacing vinyl with vinyl, we would be like, oh, here's some alternative options to kind of restore some of those lost features or materials that might have gone to the wayside. So that could be a conversation we can have, and just making sure that you're like, I'm going to do $20,000 in work and I expect, to get my amount, the 7,000 back. When in reality we'd be like, well, you're going to do something different with the windows, or, you can't, it's all or nothing. So I would encourage, this is a great example of what I was kind of talking about, like all the parties working together for a project.
And at our city staff level, we're definitely very open, very supportive of that. And I will be the first to tell you, I am not an expert in all of these rules. And you've heard that they are fairly technical. And so we just know what phone number to dial and put you in touch with and do that coordination. And, you know, we've got the equipment here to do even a virtual meeting where we're all in a room talking to them together. So that's always an option for you if you don't have that kind of technology or expertise to do that on your own at home. We can certainly support that type of a meeting.
Yeah, I think anybody from our office is happy to join on meetings all the time, so, yeah, we love talking to many people. Well, great, so that was all, now it's actually the end. Yeah, case study. Yeah, let us know if you have any questions, we just really appreciate everybody coming today.
Did you have handouts? Their business card?
We do, I got Andres's cards and then everybody has their own business cards as well.
Everyone's calling.
Oh, great.
Yeah. And so up front here on the table to my right is the different surveys that have been done. And then just for fun, because we worked hard to locate a free or an extra paper copy. This is our city's comprehensive plan, which provides guidance for our growth, development, and evolution. There's actually a chapter in here that talks about cultural resources, and that's where we touch on the importance of our historic assets. All of this information is also available on the city website, so it's pretty handy. If you have a hard time finding it, just give us a call at our planning desk here and we'll help you navigate the website to find it. And then staff-wise, I said we got Dory. She has been tasked to taking care of this board for a long time. I've also had Bert Warshall in the room. He's our compliance specialist. Very knowledgeable and a great addition to our team here at the city of Woodland Park. And then our AV guy in the back is CJ, senior planner. So I think that's it for staff in terms of who is here, and just thank you very much for taking time out of your day. Very glad you came and attended, and we would love to talk with you more about your thoughts, ideas, and dreams for your historic properties. Thank you.